The first acquisition was made in tandem with my then girlfriend, now wife, and it was really focused on not the actual individual piece of real estate, but the underlying market conditions around the real estate. Like my big belief going in, and still now, is almost everyone focuses explicitly just on the actual building and kind of misses about like what's going on in the market. And what we fell in love with was like, hey, we want to find a market which we were defining as a zip code that had a lot of demand to actually be in there, but very limited rental supply. So a lot of people want to be there, no rentals available, no land left to build new rentals. They don't allow multifamily development, so you can't knock down a house and build a multifamily. Like, that kind of creates a really interesting situation of like you're in an advantaged position as the landlord. So we've picked the market that we liked, and then it was just a function of like what is the first house that roughly fits what we're looking for, meaning like 3 bedrooms in good shape, and we'll buy the first one that has that criteria in the specific market that we like. So that's what we did. I think that was 2018, 2019. We bought that house, and we still technically own it today through the fund.
Cool. And so, how did that evolve into I want to focus purely on markets where there's elite school districts?
That ended up being kind of the core driver for the demand side of the equation. It's like we think about real estate through supply and demand. Like, an elite school district really is the demand driver. Like if you look at census data, like, hey, why do people move? Like, biggest reason people move is moving somewhere for a new job. And then the second largest reason people move is family reasons / moving to take care of an elderly parent, relative, somebody who might be sick. And then the third largest reason that people move is family reasons for the betterment of the kids. And it was like, hey, on the job side, offices are everywhere. I have no control over what that looks like, and office locations can move. Um, Moving to take care of families, like, that can completely depend on where the family is. But moving for the betterment of kids, for most people, they define it as a better education for their kids.
Hmm.
And the really good school districts don't move. They are static, they're stationary. If you can invest in those really good school districts, you've got a lot of people, millions of people per year, who are looking to try to make that move.
Got it. And what's the ideal type of property to own in one of those school districts? Because I imagine it's probably already, the if it's a great school district, prices are elevated, and there's
Mm-hmm.
probably, starter homes are probably harder to come by. What's like? What are the metrics you use to measure this is a great deal, and what type of property do you target?
We've got a lot. All in, it's about 17 metrics that we use that we need something to hit. About
Oh,
one and a
wow.
half percent of homes on the market fit all 17 criteria. Some of them are gimmies, like minimally 3 bedrooms, minimally 1.5 bathrooms. We exclusively buy across a couple states in the Midwest, so we need garages because people don't want the car outside in the snow. But then we have a bunch of, call it, extra ones that we care about. We're building the portfolio so we could sell it down the line. So we care about what some of the bigger single family players care about, like speed limit of the street that the house is on. House has got to be on a
Hmm.
25-mile-an-hour speed limit for us to street for us to buy it. Can't have solar panels. Can't have a pool. So once you take all of those kind of 17 into equation, if it passes all of those, then you actually need to do the financial underwriting. You need it to have a unlevered yield on cost of at least 6, ideally 6.5.
Say that again.
And
I'm
it,
sorry. Unlevered what?
Unlevered yield on cost. So ideally, we want to all of our acquisitions minimally at least a 6, ideally a 6.5 when we purchase it.
Can you give an example what that means? Unlevered yield on cost.
For sure. So unlevered yield on cost is basically a function of like the numerator is your NOI, like the actual profit that the home makes per year before debt service, over the total purchase price of the house plus any closing costs or renovation costs. And we really like that metric because that tells you what the actual home or real estate property is generating for you. taking mortgage and debt out of the equation. Like if you don't want to buy a not great property because the mortgage debt is 3%, and you don't want to pass on a terrible property because the mortgage debt is 7%. You want to buy it in cash and find a way to hold it until whatever. So we like that metric because it just shows you that explicit property. How is that property performing from a return perspective?
Got it. Okay. So for example, then if you were buying a $100,000 property, it would need to create 6,000 to 6,500 per year annually after all your expenses other than your mortgage.
Exactly
Essentially.
right.
So that means $500 a month of cash flow essentially on a $100,000 house, or $200,000 would be $1,000 a month of cash flow.
Mm-hmm.
That seems great. I mean, that's really good cash flow. Is it a challenge to find those types of metrics?
It traditionally hasn't been hard for us to find those. What works in our favor is we're really targeted on what we're buying, and where we're buying it. So we only buy in 37 zip codes.
Mm.
There's 37 zip codes only that we track, and we've built a bunch of software on top of the MLS. So every time a home in one of those zip codes hits the market, it's dumped into our software, and we can check it against our 17 things. So we know when a home hits the market if we want to put an offer on it inside of 5 minutes. So we're always first offer, which gives us a pretty high hit rate. We win about 55.1% of our offers right now. So it's not super difficult just because we can kind of cut through the noise pretty quickly. Right now, for example, there's about 490 homes in the market this morning, and there was about 8 that we liked. And we were able to kind of cut through the noise to get to that 8 pretty quickly.
Wow, that's great. Awesome. And you mentioned in there that part of the reason you have these 17 metrics is because you want to appeal to eventually be able to sell the entire portfolio to maybe a private equity company or something like
Mhm.
that. What I guess what are they looking for? Like what's the end play that you see, in terms of how big this needs to be in order to appeal to them, and what's an appealing portfolio if somebody was listening to this and like, well, I'd like to build a portfolio and sell it as well.
Yeah, I think there's a couple different elements to it. I think it's super important people in general look at it because at the end of the day, if you're buying a piece of real estate, like you are most likely going to sell at some point in your lifespan, or your kids are most likely going to sell at some point in their lifespan. So like you need to be thinking about what that end buyer is going to want. So for us, our average home is around $480,000 of purchase price. They're around 500 on average now. So around 200 homes or $100 million worth of equity is kind of the tipping point where the larger funds will get excited about the portfolio and it's big enough for them to be interested in. So depending on the purchase price of somebody's portfolio, around 100 million total is the number you want to be shooting for. For in terms of like what they're looking for, the diligence that goes into an acquisition of that standpoint is much higher than every standard and traditional real estate acquisition. So, for example, we are needing to basically build our data room as we go along because they're going to need all this information. I need to have every single invoice we paid for every single maintenance technician for every single house forever neatly categorized. I
Wow.
need to have the make, model, serial number of every single oven and every single microwave and every single furnace in a spreadsheet. I need to have every single furnace filter size in a spreadsheet. We got to have all that data together because they're going to demand and expect that. If you don't have it, they're going to haircut you on price because they're going to assume that the properties are not taken care of to the level that they would want them to have been taken care of because you can't prove it with the data. But if you do have the data and you say, hey, I can show you categorically our average furnace is a 2018 furnace, they're pretty new. They're in pretty good shape. You're not going to have to replace all of the furnaces in the portfolio. Then they go, okay, like I get it. I can see that. That's proven. Like we can bump up the price a little bit because we know we're not going to be replacing a $7,000 to $8,000 furnace in every single one of these houses next year.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think most people don't start with the end in mind, especially that big of an end in mind. I think a lot of people listening to this are, more mom and pop investors, like just
Mm-hmm.
getting started in those early stage, buying a few properties or a handful of properties. They
Mm-hmm.
hear $100 million and they're like, that's insane. That's it'd be tough to get there. But
Hmm.
having a system like you talked about, it's just, you every day you can see, are there properties that meet our criteria and make sense to add to the portfolio. So I'm curious about a couple
Hmm.
things that I want to hear about. Is number one, the financing of $100 million worth of worth of
Yeah.
property, how that works, and then we can get into some of the management side of it too, because it sounds like that's a pretty significant undertaking as well.
For sure. So on the financing side of things, there's a bunch of different flavors to it. I think the most important thing on the fundraising side is financing side. And let's say you're using 80% mortgages, you're putting 20% down payment.
Is
Um,
that what you typically do?
we're actually much more. We do 59% LTV, so 41% equity in our
Wow.
acquisitions right
Okay.
now. But like whatever percentage it might be, like standard like 80% mortgage, like what I think most people forget and about that is like the bank is your business partner and they actually own 80% of your business because that's literally what the financing looks like. So I think it's an important framing because it kind of flips a switch of like the lender's just like a service vendor to me, to like my lender's my business partner. And to that end, like you got to find banks, typically community banks, like credit unions. Those kinds of folks are most likely to work with you, but actually truly treat them like a partner. Like you are doing your quarterly financial planning for the next quarter, and you've also finalized your numbers from the past quarter. Send them to the bank. Like
Mm.
that loan officer is used to hearing from you only when you are looking for a loan, but they still own 80% of the property that they gave you last time. Like check in with them. Like, hey Bob, hey Sally, how you doing? Like this is how things are going in this property. Like our plans for the next quarter is we're going to probably do some work on this unit and this unit, and otherwise things are looking good. Or like, hey, things are not looking super great right now, but we know that, and here's our plan on how we're going to fix it. That's going to build a lot of confidence with Bob and Sally. Next time you go back to them to get a loan, they'll be like, oh, I know you. You've got your eye on the ball. You've done a great job with all the properties. I love how you keep me informed. Like it goes a really long way with those lenders. So for us, like we're really focused on kind of building those relationships with really good lenders. We've got one primary that's got most of the portfolio, and then two challengers who both have pieces of the portfolio. That's important. So all banks know that they need to continue to be a good partner to you, otherwise they'll be replaced. And we exclusively use 30-year debt, fixed debt. Don't want to use floating. Don't want to use arms. Don't want to do anything cute that could slightly juice return in exchange of too much risk. And like I said, we're at the 59% LTV right now.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. And so I guess, why do you only do 59% as opposed to leveraging up to 80%, which you see with a lot of investment loans?
So we typically go in at 65%. Right now we're at
Okay.
59 because we haven't purchased anything in 3-4 months, and we're have been paying down debt across a couple of years now for different homes. So on the portfolio right now, it's 59%. We typically do 65. For us, 65 has been like the right intersection of um, still like really healthy on DSCR, and we're confident that we're going to be able to cover the monthly payments, but also can get the highest return associated with it. Like theoretically, if you lever at 100%, that's the highest possible return, but the highest amount of risk. And our like intersection of like risk return curves as like around 65% is, at least with these interest rates, we think is the best spot for us to be at.
Got it. Okay. So, okay. Say a $500,000 average purchase price you mentioned. So
Mm-hmm.
then before your debt, you add debt to it, you'd be cash flowing at least $2,500 a month on that for the 6%. And then you add the debt on that. So then you've got still, I would imagine, some cash flow
Mm-hmm.
there. What's the end goal that you have with the, or I guess, like, what's, when you project your numbers out, do you
Mm-hmm.
what do you how do you base that type of type of return that you're eventually trying to get to? Is it a function of uh, mostly equity, like increasing over time, like paying off principal and the property appreciating, or are you concerned that much about cash flow?
So it's The answer is both.
Okay.
So we're forecasting our total return over like a 10 to 12 year period as we build the portfolio for sale. And the return is it's like 55% from the equity and 45% of the return comes from the cash flow. So it's pretty close. We pay out cash flow monthly to our investors, so they get monthly direct deposits. And then on the equity side, it's mostly actually comes from the value of assembling a portfolio. The homes theoretically should appreciate a little bit, but it's kind of one of those situations where like each home individually is worth 500, but if we have a package of 200 of them together, we can sell each home for 580
Oh, really?
because it's a value. The value of the portfolio is greater than the sum of its parts. So the equity return comes from the value of that kind of assembly.
Oh, really? Okay. I didn't realize that. So there's a big boost to the value by having it all sold together as a portfolio. Got it.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. And so when it comes to your fund, then
Mm-hmm.
what's the size of the fund? What type of projected returns do you offer to people? Can you share a little bit about the details of that? And I guess also like what maybe what are some of the pros and cons of having a fund as opposed to raising capital for each deal?
There's a lot of cons, for lack of a better way to
Okay.
describe it. Um,
It's not all
I
roses and sunshine.
Absolutely not. It's a there's a ton of added complexity and an insane amount of added cost from going down the fund path. I strongly would prefer actually if we were able to go deal by deal, but it's just with the nature of the purchase price of what we buy, coupled with how fast they sell. It's great homes and good school districts. Like they hit the market at 9 a.m. and they are under contract at 12 noon.
Mm.
Like we need the cash in the bank to be able to move on them, and we can't do that if we go deal by deal. Although it would be much easier if we could do that. Um, the reason why it's so complex on the fund side is, I mean, we are an SEC registered instrument. Like we are raising capital from folks. Um, the legal the legal side alone is significant. We need to have two different accounting firms. One is called the fund administrator. They're in charge of, for lack of better words, like delineating what dollar goes where.
Mm.
And then we have a separate accounting firm that prepares tax returns for all of our investors, the K1s, and audits the first accounting firm.
Oh, I see.
And like between the three of those, like that's depending on the fund size and complexity and what that looks like, that could be 80 to 100 grand a year just for those three players.
Wow.
It's a ton of added headache as a result from there. The the only real benefit to going down the fund path is if you believe the economic return is larger from having a fund. And in our case, because we're trying to build a portfolio, we think the economic return is larger going down it. So this path, so we have to do it this particular way. But if you can get away with not doing it, I think it is a much better solution. And there are some really fantastically sophisticated. I think the best multifamily operator in the country is a company called Northland. And they are 30, 40 years old at this point, and they have never once raised a fund. They
Wow.
are exclusively deal by deal. Granted, their deals are 100 million plus,
Mm-hmm.
but they're 40-year history and probably the best multifamily operators in the country, and they've never once raised a fund.